Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, be aware that the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be fucked up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Welcome, Occultists, back to Occultae Veritatis podcast. My name is Leon Filger.
Sage Murray.
Ood Gallifrey.
And in studio with us, Cammy Clark, making her second appearance.
Hello.
And Dr. Bovey, who's a first-timer.
Hey.
So tonight we're talking about the Nazi medical experiments, but before we get into that, let's jump straight into What's Your Poison?
So, what's your poison?
Tonight on What's Your Poison, we've got 2013 Central Coast Cupcake Vineyards Cabernet Sauvignon. It was literally the cheapest wine they had at the liquor store, so I picked it up and decided we'd poison ourselves with that to begin with.
Cupcake Vineyards.
Cupcake Vineyards. Yeah, it's...
if I visit there, they better have an adjoining bakery. It's a waste.
Sage, you want to pass it around there?
Oh, God. I'm not a good pourer.
That's too much.
I have absolutely zero concept of what's a good wine or a bad wine.
I think you just have to swirl it around a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And then say that it smells like oak and fruit.
As I've said in the past, the Queen's Vintner... the Queen's Vintner has said that the quality of the wine, or rather the wine should not be judged so much on its quality, but rather the company with whom you enjoy it.
I don't know who wants this
so
one.
So if you have a shitty wine, but you're with some really good people, the wine's really not all that bad.
I wouldn't pour it in, because I already got two things in that cup.
Okay, let's do the taste.
Alrighty.
I love wine. It tastes kind of like church wine.
It is church wine.
Mm-hmm. That's the wine that when I was like 14 or 15, we had a priest who shall remain nameless who used to hook us up with church wine, and we all just would get shit-faced, all the Ukrainians.
It's nice to hear a positive priest story.
He also married me.
Oh. Like he was your husband, or he...
No.
Okay.
No, he married Mr. Sage Murray and I.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I find this wine to be empty. It's got a little
empty.
starting flavor and then just not much oomph to it at the end. So as far as red wines go, I'm going to rate it a 3 out of 10, but it'll get the job done because it's a red wine.
I'll rate it a 5 out of 10 for nostalgia, and also it'll get the job done.
You know, I was trying to mentally increase like the level of pretentiousness within me and see if I could taste any like nuances in here.
You cannot.
I got nothing.
Talk about the tannins.
Oh,
there aren't any tannins. It's not like there's no tannins in it. It's not the kind of wine that I normally like.
Yes, the tannins, you can definitely taste them.
You can taste the lack of them.
You can taste the lack of them. The tannins are the things at the back of, when you feel like the dryness at the back of your tongue, when you go like...
That's your gag reflex.
Is that what they mean by a dry wine?
Yeah, like that right at the back there.
Yeah?
Yeah, that like...
Oh, that makes you want a cracker?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is why when you're stoned, every wine is dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Which we're going to get later. Woo!
Probably not me.
No, second episode we record tonight. We've got some smoky poison.
I don't know, wine is wine is wine. Like 5 out of 10 is just average for me, so I'm going to give it a 5.
But Mengele didn't just let new arrivals live so they could work in the labour camps. He wanted them for medical research. His SS file reveals him as a specialist in genetics and eugenics. Mengele shared Hitler's obsession with racial purity. His dream was to copy the blonde, blue-eyed model of Aryan perfection, exemplified by members of the Hitler Youth, and then develop the means to genetically manufacture it on a massive scale.
So in studio with us, our resident expert for this episode is Cami Clark. She was here for the Vince Lee episode. She's the ER nurse, medical student, and she's done some research for us to contribute to this episode because I couldn't do it alone because there's only so much Wikipedia one can read.
And we love Cami.
Also in studio, who will be guesting on a later episode, is Dr. Bovey, who's a MD and is hoping to get into neurosurgery, right? Or
luckily, got in.
You got into...
Fuck yeah, you did.
Fuck yeah, I did.
The only question is, why the fuck are you slumming it with us?
Yeah. the future neurosurgeon in the room.
Yeah.
Maybe it has something to do with the way I came in with my extra battery to start my car. This is just my life preferred.
Oh boy, destiny then.
Yep. All right, Nazi medical experiments. So I began my research, as I usually do, on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia had divided all the Nazi medical experiments into 3 categories, and I didn't like that, so I made it 4 categories instead.
Of course you did.
I submitted the edit to Wikipedia, and they rejected it. So the 4 categories of Nazi medical experiments are as follows. The survival category, which was experiments that they were doing to test the survivability of various things to help the Axis military personnel survive, especially on the Eastern Front when it was really fucking cold. They did like tear gas experiments, just all kinds of shit. We'll get into that in a bit. Category number 2 is pharmaceutical and treatment methods. So there are like sulfa drugs came out of that and other exciting shit, and some terrible things happened. The 3rd category is the racial and ideological category. And these were the experiments carried out by the infamous Dr. Josef Mengele.
Isn't it Mengele?
Mengele?
You were practicing it as Mengele.
It's Mengele. Men is the first syllable. Mengele. Fine.
Just say it angry, and then it'll
Mengele.
Mengele.
Anyway, those were experiments that were sought to advance the racial and ideological tenets of the Nazi worldview. And then I added a 4th category, which were the sterilization experiments. And what the Nazis wanted to do was find out the most like efficient and effective way to sterilize as many Jews and gypsies as possible without spending money doing hysterectomies and expensive experiments like that. And they ended up settling on using X-rays, which cause all kinds of horrible chemical, or rather radiation burns. But be damned, it got the job done. And so we also learned a lot more about how dangerous X-rays are and their various uses through those medical experiments, because X-ray photography, whatever the fuck it's called, I don't know.
Radiography?
There you go. X-ray radiography.
Thanks, doctor.
Was tested and refined a lot during the Holocaust. So let's jump into the first category, which is the survival of Axis military personnel. Okay, so the survival experiments went like this, and there were a bunch of them, from high-altitude experiments, which were particularly fucky, hypothermia experiments, which I think Cami's going to touch on. So the way they did some of the altitude experiments is they had a pressure chamber. And they wanted to test the survivability of bailouts at high altitude. So they were able to get the pressure in the chamber down to the equivalent.
What's a bailout?
Jumping out of the airplane.
Okay.
Yeah, bailing out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know we were talking about airplanes.
Okay. Well, what do you do at 60,000 feet above the ground?
I don't know your life.
Okay, that's fine. So they were testing as high as 66,000 feet, and they were testing the very first pressure suits that were ever used by fighter pilots. And they were using predominantly Jewish test subjects, putting them in the pressure chamber, cranking it down to up to 66,000 feet, and watching what happened when their blood boiled and their eyeballs popped out.
Holy fuck.
So they did hundreds of those experiments. Most of the subjects died during the experiments, and those who didn't were executed shortly after that, so they could do autopsies and figure out what their bodies had done. Something I'll state, like on the get-go, there are a lot of people who will say that a lot of good came out of the Nazi human experimentation, but the problem is that so much of the scientific method was wrong or ignored that there's no real clinical validity to any of it. So to the folks who say, well, there was some good stuff, no, there
Fuck
wasn't.
You.
Both our experts are shaking their heads now. No, there was nothing good to come out of it. So hypothermia testing.
Yes, hypothermia testing. Okay, so I don't know how to say this guy's name, but I want to call him Douche because it starts with a D and has a CH in it.
That's
fair. I think it's more like Douche. I don't know. Anyways, that is the physician that was like the lead on most of the hypothermia experimentation. So they would basically take people. Most of them were naked. Most of them were not under any sedation, had no sedation or no anesthesia, and then were placed into extremely cool baths. Many of them died during the experimentation or were killed after, which is a running theme with most of this work. So there was actually a fascinating article in the New England Journal of Medicine by Dr. Berger that was released in 1990, and he actually went through all of the experiments that were completed and critiqued them.
Cool.
Which was super interesting. So I recommend, if you want to know more information about the process that he did that, check out that article. You can just find it online. And most of it's in lay terms, so it's pretty easy to like read through and understand. But basically, from what I got from reading through his stuff and researching some other things online, we didn't really get much from those experiments, and they were super barbaric and terrible, obviously, as most of them were. We may have gotten a little bit of understanding about physiology in terms of like what happens when our bodies are cooled, and there was some information about rewarming techniques. And then I thought I'd put a little plug in, since I really love emergency medicine, is like now we use cooling of people when they come in cardiac arrest, like their heart is stopped, and then we're able to get their heart beating again, but they're not conscious. So we now, not we, as in like the emergency departments everywhere, only some of them will do this, but they will use a cooling technique to cool people, which actually reduces like cerebral edema, like brain swelling and brain damage, and there's better outcomes as a result of that.
Cool.
So that's the only like small link that I could find to say that perhaps that was good, but for the most part, no. Dr. Douche was a bad man.
Seems like it.
Man, it really goes to show that, like, the cultural brainwashing that happened in the German populace, where they were teaching that the Jewish people were subhuman and all that, like, it trickled down. Oh, I guess it trickled up to even the scientists and doctors of that society for them to commit this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and what I found so interesting about reading this is that many of these physicians, I guess, that were doing these experiments were like subpar physicians that like could not get jobs anywhere. Like nobody wanted to hire them because they were like cracks and idiots. And they were like, oh, let's bring them in to just do these rando experiments on these people. And
it
they're
was
like, fuck yeah, a job.
It was almost a make work project.
Yeah, I guess.
I feel like there was, as well as an exodus of German rocket scientists during the war, there was also an exodus of German doctors who objected to everything that was going on.
Yeah, because generally educated people are more liberal in their views and more progressive, in their views.
And there's that whole Hippocratic Oath. I think that somehow these experiments...
That is important.
No. You actually have the option of whether
I'm really glad you're going to be operating on brains soon with your lack of Hippocratic Oath.
It's formality. It's not part of finishing medical school.
So you can't
don't go to your grad.
So
you don't have to do the oath.
So you can cause harm.
I mean, first cause harm. Isn't that how it goes?
And then fix it later.
Yeah. I
but
believe
not
that's what,
hypothermia.
What firefighters do, right? They say like a lot of arsonists are firefighters. They set the fire and then come back to put it out. So you make people very, very sick and then bring them back.
It was a business strategy.
Exactly. Yeah. In our not-for-profit system. How do you make your money on that fraud?
Well, I think I have 6 years to figure that out.
That's fair. Okay, so between February 1942, April 1945, experiments were conducted at Dachau, and I chose this one because Dachau is the easiest of the concentration camps to pronounce. I'm going to get more complex as we drink more, but I've got a list that I'm going to try to pronounce. It's pretty exciting. So they did malaria testing, where there were 1,200 folks they gave malaria to, and then tried a number of different methods and drugs to cure them, none of which were successful, and all of the subjects died.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
There was also all kinds of testing on immunization for typhoid, tuberculosis, yellow fever, infectious hepatitis, and whatnot. And again, a lot of those were cases of people being infected, the treatments being unsuccessful, and them dying or being executed as soon as they were finished the study so that autopsies could be performed right away. And then jumping into the ideological category, a lot of this happened under Josef Mengele at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and what they had said, and you touched on that perfectly, is they tried really hard in a PR campaign to get the German public to believe that the Jews were inferior, but they didn't at the time have a whole lot to back that up with. So it was the task of Dr. Mengele to come up with medical reasons why the Jewish race was inferior.
Oh, Jesus.
He failed to do any of those, but there were a hell of a lot of people that were tortured as a result of that. And sort of their research was to establish the Jewish racial inferiority, but it wasn't successful.
You don't say.
At all. They also did some twin studies, which were pretty fucked up.
Funny enough you say that, Leon. I actually have a recording of a survivor of the Holocaust that was interviewed, and she happened to be a twin that was ripped away from her mother. Here's that.
I was born in 1934, one of a pair of twins. Miriam and I were the third and fourth children in the family. We lived in a very small village in Transylvania, Romania. We got down from the cattle car. People were selected to live or to die. People crying, pushing, shoving, dogs barking, trying to make some sense of that place. And I actually turned around in trying to figure out what is that place. Never seen a place like that before. And as I turned around, I realized that my father and my two older sisters were gone. Never saw them again. We were holding on to mother for dear life. A Nazi was running in the middle of that selection platform, yelling in German, "Twins, twins." He noticed us and demanded to know if we were twins. And my mother asked, "Is that good?" And the Nazi said yes. My mother said yes. At that moment, another Nazi came, pulled my mother to the right. We were pulled to the left. We were crying. She was crying. And all I ever remember is seeing my mother's arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never even said goodbye to her, but I did not understand that this would be the last time that we would see her. And all that took 30 minutes from the time we got down from the cattle car and my whole family was gone. Only Miriam and I were left holding hands and crying. We were Mengele twins, which we found out later on what that meant.
Yeah, I want to hear about the twin studies.
So they take pairs of twins. One of the more extreme cases is that they would make them conjoined twins again. Most of the surgeries were done without any sort of anesthesia. It was just hack them open. They had done surgeries on people where they'd cut a limb off and reattach it and try to see what techniques they could use to help them reattach that limb. And it was all like practice for helping German armed forces people survive. But yeah, a lot of people were tortured. At Auschwitz was when they did the really, really fucky studies, and at Buchenau, where they, like I said, were taking twins and sewing them back together. They were injecting pigment into the eyes of one twin to see how fast it could get back to the eyes of the other twin, or if they could somehow change a twin's genetic code. Of course, not knowing anything about DNA at the time. Can you imagine if they knew about DNA, how much worse this would have been?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, like 23andMe is scary enough without Nazi doctors being thrown in.
Yeah.
What's that DNA switching?
CRISPR.
What if they had access to something like
Nazis
CRISPR?
with CRISPR.
Jesus.
Yeah, everyone would get
Talk
CRISPR.
about lizard people. That would be everywhere.
Yeah. And so the fourth category were the sterilization experiments. And like I'd mentioned in the beginning, they tested a few different methods of sterilizing people. And the idea is that they didn't want to just castrate men, for example, because it's a lot of them would bleed to death, and that costs a lot of money. And I mean, trying to perform all sorts of sterilization procedures, like you can't do them rapid fire on literally millions of people. Yeah. So they were trying things, different drugs. They were trying an electric bolt gun in the vagina that they just put in and fire off like a firework to just fry the cervix. That was the idea. And then
they just literally shoot it up there.
Just put a small explosive device up the vagina and blow the cervix open, and then boom, you can't carry a pregnancy.
Terrifying.
Yeah, and they were able to do that really, really quickly, one after another. But the problem was that there were too many suicides among the people who were administering the therapy. So they, just like the reason they did the gas chambers is when the Holocaust started, they were just shooting people and throwing them in ditches. But it got to the point where the executioners couldn't do it. They were committing suicide. They were refusing to do it and being executed themselves. So Hitler came up with the gas chambers so that we wouldn't have to worry about what is now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Because you can imagine, I mean, shooting millions of people is really going to get to you. And it's bad publicity when you go back to your hometown.
And you're shooting women and children and grandfathers and grandmothers and just helpless people. It's not all like fighting age people that you're shooting. That's the image that comes into most people's minds. Like, they are executing entire family lineages.
Yeah.
And it's way easier to just flick a switch than have to actually look into the eyes of the person that you're killing, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Having no experience with murder myself.
Well, and it's I watched a couple of Auschwitz documentaries, and it seems to me that they wanted to dehumanize the deaths as much as possible. Also, it was like shooting someone is something you do to a human. That's how you kill a human being.
Yeah, on the battlefield.
But gassing, euthanasia, that's what you do to a dog when you put it down, and that was sort of their bit behind it.
You know, this hooks up strangely with the podcast I've been listening to, where a guy argues with alt-right people and tries to get them to turn over. And he was arguing with a race realist.
Ugh, that sounds like a lesson in futility.
Oh, it definitely is. Like, it's entertaining, but I think in the end he's wasting his time.
It's a lot of emotional labor.
But I found out through there that these race realists, like the pseudoscience behind white supremacy, like, they use some of Joseph Mengele's work in order to support their science. So when they say stuff like this group of people is smarter than this group of people, or any of...
Was it Sam Harris who said that? Because fucking
no,
that guy
probably.
Also, no, he did say that.
I see a scary thing all the time, though, because, like, one thing I didn't say is I teach first-year medicine.
Yeah.
And so I'm correcting assignments from these people, and I'll get, like, 40 assignments, and a ton of them will write it out first and then find the source that agrees with what they said.
Oh.
Not a ton. That's an exaggeration. But enough that it's become a noticeable trend. And so you end up with interesting things, like when they talk about something, they'll have this source from, like, a Portuguese journal from the 80s, and you go, wait a second.
Yeah.
There's no way that's what you found to form your opinion. So it's kind of scary. It's these people with extreme opinions are doing it, but some of us are too, you know? Like, we're just picking our thing and then finding the crazy thing that supports us.
Yeah, putting the cart before the horse, as it were.
Yeah. So the Nuremberg trials that followed the war tried a lot of Nazi officers, and that was Nazi officers and political leaders. But what's not often remembered is that there were about 20 doctors who were put on trial. The only ones they were able to find who were still alive at the end of the war. And they were convicted of all sorts of things. Some of them weren't, though. There were a couple of doctors who left Germany after the Nuremberg trials and went to practice medicine in the United States just due to a lack of evidence, which is pretty disturbing.
That's yucky.
Yeah, and they had like 85 witnesses at the Nuremberg trials during the medical section. They had witnesses who were people who'd had their limbs sewn back on or had been victims of the mustard gas experiments. And I guess there were several members of the jurors' panels who quit and just like walked after that because seeing the extent of the devastation to the victims was too much for them.
And in case you were wondering, the punishment for many of those doctors was death. And here's just one recording of that sentence being laid out.
Karl Brandt, Military Tribunal 1 has found and adjudged you guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and membership in an organization declared criminal by the judgment of the International Military Tribunal as charged under the indictment heretofore filed against you. For your said crimes on which you have been and now stand convicted, Military Tribunal 1 sentences you, Karl Brandt, to death by hanging, and may God have mercy upon your soul. The officer of the guard will remove the defendant Brandt.
I think I'll close with what's our opinion and I think I know how to answer this. What's our opinion on the use of human test subjects, not necessarily in this context alone, but using people for medical studies, period? Cami.
Period. Well, I think that, studying things in pregnancy, that's very different from animal models to human models. Do I agree with that, though, all the time? And I think that's why, even though this was such a terrible thing, like at least one good thing came out of it, and that was like the Nuremberg Code and now the ethical guidelines that we use when we do complete studies on people, and ensuring that there's real informed consent and we are not causing suffering. And if anything is going to be dangerous to somebody, then the research isn't going to happen. It'll be denied by an ethics board.
Yeah, fair enough.
So,
and, that is the one good thing to come out of it, is that it did lead to really strict guidelines on how you could and could not torture people for medical reasons.
Mm-hmm. And which is really important, because I just think that sometimes people get really obsessed and involved in their own work, and they'll do anything that they can do because they think that they're helping the greater good, like they're so utilitarian in their views. They're like, okay, well, this is going to save a greater amount of people later down the line, and that's just not okay.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like Grindelwald on Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Okay.
My glasses.
Yeah,
right.
Utilitarianism it seems freeing at first. It seems like the positive choice at first, because, there is a greater good and people assume that you're going to be part of the greater good, but there's always sacrifice at the other end.
Mm-hmm.
And to have a greater good, there has to be sacrifice. So it seems freeing until you're the one being sacrificed. And there's a thought experiment where you have, a bag placed over your head and you're not sure who you are. And you might be a member of any group of people. And the challenge is to create a world where no matter who you are when you take off that veil, you have an equal place in the world. And I think in a utilitarian view, you don't have that guarantee.
Or worse, you have to be a world of one.
Oh, yes.
Right. It's like the only answer.
Yeah. I understand there's a certain amount of science that can be done from disasters. Like, if a disaster happens, scientists can use that opportunity to learn things, but I don't think they should take the initiative to cause harm to learn new information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting point, because there's already so much of every single problem almost that we can imagine going on, that you can be an opportunist utilitarian but not quite go as far as causing harm.
Yeah.
And I actually think about kids with cancer. There's this initiative where they try and say, every single kid is in a trial of some sort. And it's the kind of thing where you go, best, or is this slightly better?
Mm-hmm.
And that I like. I like the idea of everyone being, written down their experiences and what happened to them, and then using that data. I don't like so much random experimentation. I would never take a flock of kids with leukemia and, let's try new things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I would say if we have a drug that seems to be 10% more effective, let's make sure we write down who has it and who doesn't.
Oh, yeah. I guess it's kind of a looser experiment rather than like a formalized trial. You kind of just collect data as it comes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Not like cutting people and sewing them back together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for what purpose,
Yeah.
right? That's the other thing. So many of these experiments, even though they, stated that they were purposeful, were they purposeful?
Well, and so much like Dr. Mengele standing on the platform at Auschwitz, waiting for trains to come in and just doing like his picking and choosing for his experiments. And there were, it's I'm not sure how long ago it came out, but there were other Nazi officers and Nazi non-commissioned officers who were going to be rewarded for certain deeds they had done, and they would stand beside him on the platform and choose rape victims out of the cattle cars. So that's fucky and really sick to be doing that. I don't think you come up with new medical information by picking people out of cattle cars.
No, you don't.
It sounds like you didn't get much out of, from all the situations you've described were basically, well, there's this peripheral thing that we learned later and we didn't need any of the Nazi experiments to learn, and that's it.
I think the poor methodology involved in the tortures really speak to the fact that they weren't medical experiments so much as just torture sessions.
Torture,
Someone was getting off to it, I think.
I would agree. I would say that these people were very ill.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a medical practice or procedure. It was just, it had nothing to do with medicine.
And if they were actually involved in the medical community, they would have looked at the research that was already going on some of these topics, because you mentioned like the sulfa-drug thing, and we kind of were messaging about that before this too, about sulfa-drugs. And there was actually experimentation going on at the same time in the United States and in Europe that was testing sulfa-drugs for their effectiveness in treating infections. That was much more humane.
And in those exact studies, they compared the German results to the American results and confirmed that the German results were not statistically viable at all.
Exactly. Or there was, things that they were doing with pregnant women, like removing their uterus and ovaries while they were pregnant and different things like that, because they were finding out about the stages of prenatal development. But that information had already been determined by
cases like
researchers in 1942 before that. So.
Poisoning pregnant women with various things and seeing if they could still successfully deliver a healthy child.
Yeah.
Cooling them to a point of hypothermia and seeing if they could still deliver a healthy child. Doing all sorts, draining their blood out, getting their blood pressure as low as possible to see if they could.
Why?
Shits and giggles, and that's why I say that's a shits and giggles.
Yeah, it's totally
kind of
shits and giggles situation.
Like it doesn't seem like he was doing any serious investigation. Like I'm not sure if he just didn't have the background or the experience and methodology to form it. I think that's part of it. I think he was a failed doctor that couldn't make it elsewhere. And but I also think there's also a sadistic element to it. Like he was using this opportunity to work out his own psychopathy. Maybe that's not the right word, but
I think it is. I think he probably had like antisocial personality disorder, or like a narcissistic. Like he had. I'm in psych right now, so I think everyone has a personality disorder. But,
I remember Psych 101. Right.
But yeah, he definitely had something going on, and I was reading too that most of his medical notes were also just complete and total gibberish. So they don't even really know like what he was trying to do in the first place.
And like I've read descriptions of him like on the platform waiting for the train to come in, waiting for his new batch of people to pick from, and he would be so excited that he'd be rolling back and forth on his feet. Like he was just giddy about it. Like there has to be some sort of just like he took great joy in taking ownership of their bodies and using them as just objects.
Mm-hmm. And that's why birth control. Because people like that don't need to be born.
Yeah.
And speaking of birth control, that moves us into our 3 sexy questions.
Ooh. Jingle.
Sexy questions.
Right, so the 3 sexy questions for tonight all deal with sex ed. So we're talking about that, particularly the teaching of consent, healthy relationships, healthy sexual relationships. So the first question, and these are sort of free-form questions, I'm thinking a lot about the kerfuffle in Ontario right now about their sex education curriculum being put through, which is very progressive. They talk from a very young age about non-gender normative relationships, non-gender normative sexualities. Everything's on a continuum, as well as introducing talk about contraception in grade 4, which is something I'm personally in favor of. But I guess my sort of loose question to you guys is, what is too soon and when is it too soon?
I wish I had that, because let me tell you, in grade 7 or 8, whenever we had sex ed, I raised my hand and asked if you could get pregnant from a dildo, because I legit thought that they were filled with sperm, and no one had told me otherwise. And how I'm like how sad is that?
Yeah, you ought to know that.
Yeah, I should have known that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I suppose it's very anecdotal, but a lot of the bisexual and gay people that I know spent a period in their adolescence like dating the opposite sex because they thought that's what they should do. And it wasn't until they had their first sexual experience and felt no real pleasure or joy in it that they discovered that they didn't have a taste for it. And I think that if they got education earlier that, being non-binary or not being straight was a viable option, and like some people are like that, if they got that knowledge when they were younger, they could have been doing things they actually enjoyed in their formative years. They could have been forming like adolescent relationships with the same sex instead of wasting time believing that they're straight.
Well, that was exactly what happened to me. I went to Catholic school for 9 years. I, in retrospect, knew I was bisexual from the time I was like 8 or 9. But at the time, I was told there were two sexualities. There's gay, which is bad, and straight, which is good.
You
have to be one or the other, and if you're gay, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
And I couldn't fit myself into either one of those boxes.
Yeah.
And then after I had sort of figured out, like, yeah, I'm bi, it probably kept me in the closet an extra 10 years. having not had that education at a young age. Mm-hmm. So from my standpoint, I think you can come up with age-appropriate responses to a lot of tough questions, and as soon as a kid's old enough to ask, a kid's old enough to know, of course dumbing it down to a level and a language that they can understand, but it's never too early to start with sex ed.
Well, I agree. Yeah, it's never too early.
With my kid, like, we play, like, he plays with toys because he's 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
And he has families with 2 dads and a kid, and does families with 2 moms and a
that's
kid.
Nice.
Yeah, like, he doesn't. He's like, oh,
families with a bird and a chicken.
Yeah, like he doesn't really care. Like we've encouraged that kind of play, so that I think that's pretty appropriate at his age. So
yeah, because I think if you don't show people that these things are actually normal, then they always think that they're not normal, and then you're always fighting against trying to defeat their idea of normalcy, and that's just it's just bullshit. Like people, like, these constructed ideas that we're taught from a very young age about gender and whatever. It's stupid. Makes me ragey.
Yes.
So that means the real answer for you from all of us, I think, is when they get it. So you just approach them at their level, and like your 3.5-year-old. I mean, it's not a terrible thing for your kid to know the word penis, for example.
Oh, he doesn't know any other word for it, and he knows that I have a vulva.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's
fantastic.
Knowledge.
That's advanced knowledge. Yeah.
Question number 2. Of course, in Ontario and everywhere else, there's talk about exempting certain people from that mandatory sex ed on particularly religious grounds.
Fuck those people.
In the same, teaching sex ed is different than immunizing your kids.
Yeah.
It is, but when you back it up, both are public health problems.
Yes.
If you've got like uneducated children running around, that costs the system money. So based on that, my next question to you is, should you be able to force kids into sex ed?
I think so. Yeah. Do it. Kids need to know about sex.
I don't like forcing people, though.
I'm all right with forcing things on some, like, I'm all for forcing immunization.
I'm up for forcing immunization.
Like, if you don't immunize, you can't go to public school or whatever. I'm cool with that.
I mean, the problem is, like, religious schools not being forced to teach it. I don't think religious schools should be publicly funded at all.
Yeah. If they're not publicly funded, like, do whatever the fuck you want. You're fucking up your own kids.
It just concerns me because, like, I remember just getting out of high school. Like, I attended Bowman when I was here before I moved to Alberta, and it occurred to me that the sex ed I had received while in the Catholic system was probably causing teen pregnancies. Like, I feel like,
oh boy, I could tell some stories.
Yeah, no, I feel like the teen aid sex education program,
Fully Alive,
resulted in unwanted pregnancies and the transmission of STIs. I mean, I was told when I was in grade 8 that sexuality or sexual experience was a waterfall. First there was hugging, then there was kissing, then there's deep kissing, and as soon as you do that, you fall off the waterfall and you have AIDS.
And then you die. First you die. Yeah. First you die, and then you have AIDS.
And your soul is unredeemable. Like, you just you deep kiss and you're fucked. And they never said what deep kissing was, and I didn't understand it because I didn't know you used tongue in kissing at the time. I've never seen anyone do it.
Yeah.
You
do kissing at the deep end of the pool.
I thought kissing was the girl went like this, like pursed her lips, and the boy put his lips over her lips, and
like
that
eating
was,
her.
Yeah. And that was like like this, like that was deep kissing.
And that was intercourse. No, I'm just kidding.
And I was in public school, although I did play Mary in my grade 7 nativity scene Christmas concert at my public school.
No. I don't want to generalize, but from my experience in sex ed, if there's ever a nun teaching sex ed, it's not going to go well.
Oh boy!
What I learned, this is what I got taught. This is the most egregious thing I got taught that I still remember. She got somebody across the room to hold a hula hoop, and she got one of us on the other side of the room to hold a ping pong ball. And she said the molecular holes in the latex of the condom were as big as the hula hoop.
Yep.
And,
what the fuck?
And the sperm and STDs were the size of the ping pong ball. And everybody lined up and see if they could put the sperm or the STD through the hula hoop. And that was her thesis, that condoms are completely useless because the holes in the latex are that big and everything that's supposed to be blocking them is that big.
I was told they would cause your penis to rot and fall off.
What?
Yeah. They said it would suffocate. Your penis couldn't breathe and it would suffocate and die. And I was like, fuck, never using those.
Oh, and they also did the slut shamey, like they started at the back of the class with the cup and everybody took turns spitting in it.
Yeah,
and then the teacher would go, does anybody want a drink? And all that. Like that bullshit.
You didn't have that one slightly fucky kid who was like, "Yeah, I want a drink.
I'm in."
Who was
I will do it.
That was all three of us.
That was Devin. Devin, if you're listening, I think you did. I think I have that memory.
Should we force sex ed on kids?
I think we should. Yes, I think ultimately we should. I think. Have you guys ever heard about like the condom thing that they do in Thailand now?
No.
Where it's like, doesn't matter what you buy for alcohol. If you buy anything, it comes with a condom, and
Cool.
It's essentially like normalized the condom, and they have reduced STIs and unwanted pregnancy by a huge amount.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
There's a TED Talk on it. It's really good.
That's awesome.
And I think it's the same thing. I think if we force sex education on people, they actually can take better control of their own sex life and make accurate and informed decisions about what they want to do. And I think that's what everybody wants to do with sex, because sex can be super fun and it can be awesome.
Yeah.
So.
And kids have to know,
And
like,
kids
if
have
they
to
want to
know.
make the choice for what's the most preachy thing, abstinence only education. That's as far as we can go.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to do that, it doesn't harm their abstinence to know sex exists.
Mm-hmm.
No, it doesn't.
In my opinion,
it's like talking about suicide. With
Will not
someone,
make people commit suicide.
Yeah, exactly. So
they're going to do it anyway.
They're going to do it and it's the exact same thing with sex. Like, people are always going to have sex, especially like raunchy teenagers. They're always going to do it. So
yeah, if you're going to rely on a teenager's willpower to not have sex, it's not going to work.
No.
I remember like as a 14-year-old, I'd injured both my wrists and like fucking the gap between the box spring and the mattress because I needed to get off so badly. So yeah, I mean.
And it's a normal thing for human development,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
That's the other thing too, that I think people put so much shame into, younger people like wanting to engage
Explore
in
their
sexual
bodies.
activities. Yeah, and it's just, that's like a normal form of development, and people need to be less judgy.
I think it's fair to like want for a teenager what you desire for yourself as a 30-year-old. Like, there's no reason why you should say you don't deserve that, and I do. So the final question is, looking back at your own sex education, if you could have added one thing to it that would have changed your life now, what one thing do you wish you had learned when you were a kid?
Can't get pregnant from dildos.
Okay.
What?
Yeah, well, I just said that. I thought that you could get pregnant from dildos. I thought that they had sperm in them and they like ejaculated into you.
That would be the cruelest trick.
I know.
the sperm bank is also the dildo factory.
Yeah, and I still, like, people that went to elementary school with me still make fun of me for that.
That's fine.
But you can get toys,
I know.
that do that.
Well, you can. But I know that now.
Or implant alien eggs inside of you.
You can. What's
Shocking
it called?
truth when you're-
Ovipositing?
Yes, it is.
Ovipository.
I just read an article about it.
Yeah.
I also Googled OVPod when I was curious about this podcast.
Oh, good.
Ood.
I guess, I mean, learning anything factual about sex would have been nice.
Right?
Yeah. But let's assume that I had like a regular public school sex ed class.
It still wasn't enough.
Yeah, I would like to see, honestly, some non-binary stuff. Like even in sex ed now, there seems to be just a rigid, like, heterosexuality about it. And it'd be nice to see some, like, just because you do X activity means you're gay, and just because you do Y activity means, we should teach shades of gray between sexual acts and sexuality.
Because there are.
And we shouldn't treat heterosexuality as the default setting.
Yeah.
Because it's not.
It should be just placed as an equal alternative to every other sexuality on the spectrum.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I think that very few people are rigidly heterosexual if they're very honest with themselves.
Well, if we go by just our podcast hosts, like 2 of 3 of us are bi.
Yeah. And I want to be cuddled by who played Chris Rock's dad? Oh man, I forget his name now. He played Chris Rock's dad in the show, and he's on Brooklyn Nine-Nine right now.
Oh,
Terry Crews. I want him to rock me to sleep and tell me it's going to be okay.
I want.
So that's as
imaginable.
That's as gray as I get. Yeah.
Cami, what did you want to learn?
I think for me, I agree with you about a lack of binary stuff, but also I think just removing shame. I think is such a huge thing, because I too went to Catholic school. And that waterfall, I still have a bit of PTSD thinking about that fucking waterfall because it just made me feel like a piece of shit.
They didn't tell you the waterfall is so much fun.
Yeah, they're not like, oh, it's like whitewater rafting and it's really cool and you can bring things.
Nobody's like, oh, we have to go see the waterfall. It's the waterfall, huh?
Getting to the bottom of the waterfall is the best fucking thing you will ever do. So they've lied to you.
Yeah, they're such liars.
Then you get to climb up again, and it's
you
like
keep going
a roller
around.
coaster.
Yeah, it is.
It's like Disneyland.
It's actually shocking for me because in every subject you can have a teacher who's actually good, great at their job. I had a Catholic grade 9 sex ed teacher, and he was actually really good at it.
Oh, good.
That's good to hear. He had the question box thing happening, and he didn't back down when someone said, so what's the church's position on anal sex? And this was, I don't know, a long time ago.
Right.
And he was totally willing to answer that. But before that, I don't know. I wish someone would have talked to, my entire class, including myself, about porn.
Yeah.
And how that's not sex
we had
at all.
That is discussion on the last episode.
Oh, I missed it.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. You should listen to it. We said very insightful things, all of us.
Yeah.
Throwback to last episode.
We got in trouble. Someone
got mad at us.
Emailed us and said we were shaming the industry, and
which we weren't. We all
said that we watched porn and liked porn.
Yeah.
We're just saying that some genres of porn
and
may be problematic.
And if I remember the conversation, I think we specifically said that there's lots of different studios and people out there that are putting out good porn.
Yeah, and we said different strokes, no one's whatever. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
If I could have learned something,
literally different strokes. Yeah.
I wanted to learn more details about how the sex act actually happened. I've had prepare me for the mess. Prepare me for mostly the mess. How do you take a condom off properly? Because all the condom says is just hold the base while you pull out, and it's what the fuck does that mean? Because now I'm out, there's no condom, and it's in her somewhere. Then what do you do when that happens? That should be.
That happened to me once, and I went and got Plan B, even though I was on birth control because I really did not want to be pregnant.
Jeez, that's a double dose of hormones.
Yeah, and the pharmacist made me feel like I was an idiot.
Oh, yeah,
which is kind of shitty.
They do that.
Yeah.
Overall, though, so much more. Talk about consent, what it is, what it isn't, and why it's absolutely vital.
Consent would be super vital. I agree.
Also, using the proper words.
Yeah, consent is sexy.
Words. My grade 9 sex ed teacher called it a front bum.
Lovely.
Wait.
Front bum.
That's kind of cute, though.
Which part is I thought a front bum was when you had a bit of a belly and it kind of
No,
made...
that's
different.
That's a gunt.
That is a gunt.
Sorry.
Yes, I heard front bum a lot too growing up.
Front bum.
That is just not accurate.
Oh. Well, and when I was growing up, we called it a peepka, which is Ukrainian. Wash your peep, Sage.
My mom always said dinky.
Dinky. With my son, he knows that it's a penis, he knows that it's a vulva, he knows that it's a scrotum, he knows all those words. Yeah. So he never says my wee-wee hurts. He'll be like, my penis is big. Why is it big?
That's a good question to ask.
Right?
It is, yeah.
It is a good question to ask.
See, and now that I started hanging out with you, I know that kids can get erections. So
kids can get erections. Yeah. My son was really upset about one. So prepare yourself, future parents.
Those erections are terrifying.
If I didn't know what was happening, I'd be scared as fuck too.
But also developmentally very normal.
Yeah, totally normal. Well,
I thought I was having a heart attack the first time I got off.
Well, yeah. It's this isn't usually this hard.
No, that's terrifying. And with that, for Occultae Veritatis podcast, I'm Leon Filger.
Sage Murray.
Ood Gallifrey.
Cami Clark.
Bovie.
Have a good night.
Love
Cheers.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye. And we have a little bit of a special palate cleanser for this episode. Playing us out tonight is a song written by one of our dear fans, James Ford, and it was about one of his patients, Duncan, or Mickey Duncan. And in the email, Jay writes, Mickey Duncan was a schizophrenic resident of mine. I wrote down her obsessive ramblings over several months, and upon her death I threw them together into this song, hence the dual writing credit. The song's name is How Many Millions, co-wrote by James Ford and M. Duncan. Enjoy.
does it take to save the day? How many millions does it take to stop the rain? How many millions does it take to end her pain? 4 fucking 1. 4 fucking 1. 4 fucking 1. And how many millions does it take to eat a cake? How many millions does it take to drain a lake? How many millions does it take to end her pain? 4 fucking 1. 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 4 fucking 1.
Alrighty, thank you very much, James, for submitting that song. It sounds very heartfelt, and it sounds like you gave her last few sentiments a lot of wings. You gave it some musical accompaniment, and that's always nice. It really brought some peace to the soul after talking about Nazis for 40 minutes. Anyways, if any of you out there in podcast land make your own music in an amateur way or in a semi-professional way, or if you have any friends that are little artists, we would love to feature them. Our palette cleansers thus far have been mostly songs pulled off the public domain because they're free to play, but I would love to play songs that are made or are made by friends of occultists, and I don't mind at all featuring and putting you on our website and mentioning you and giving you a shout out on our social medias and all that. So if any of you out there want to contribute a song to the palette cleanser, just email ovfeedback@gmail.com and I'll be happy to play it. And again, if you guys want to scour the public domain for some weird shit for me to play, feel free to look for public domain songs, and if you find a cool one, I'll play it. There's around 57,000 songs that are available and legal for me to play, so it would take a long time for me to go through them all, but group effort. If you guys find, a diamond in the rough, I will be glad to play it. Now, not much new news for this week. We did most of our Patreon shoutouts last week, and we're just entering into a brand new month, going into the month of May. And something kind of special happened. Now, this episode, the Nazi episode, was recorded about 6 weeks ago from this date, which is April 29th. And about a year ago from April 28th, when we recorded last night, was a year anniversary for us recording together. And it kind of hit us. Now, we didn't start releasing episodes until Friday the 13th, October 2017, because we're a bunch of edgelords like that. But it's amazing to have so many people listening. We just hit 30,000 downloads. And I know that's peanuts compared to some of the bigger podcasts. But, I grew up in a town with a population a quarter of that. And I just imagine 4 times my town's population equals the amount of downloads we have on the podcast. And really, I would have been excited if, 5 people and my mom listened. But you guys are all tuning in, Me, Sage, and Leon, we entered this project together to have some fun and just get down in front of microphones and talk about weird, strange, hurtful things and try and expand our horizons and learn a thing or two along the way. And really, it's starting to become something real, something that we might be able to do for a living someday. And it's exciting. Being able to research this stuff and bust stigmas and have, discussions about things like this, about things that people don't want to talk about, it's a dream to do that for a living. And it's starting to slowly become a reality. I'm starting to see the light through the darkness. If you would like to be a part of that, feel free to join our Patreon. at www.patreon.com/ovpod for as little as $5 a month. And if you guys want a hot secret, when you press that button, you can manually change that $5 to $1, and you can get our $5 tier for even less than $5. So if you can't afford $5, we would take $1 instead, and we appreciate every penny of support. You know, it's kind of a bright future we're walking into. You know, 3 idiots from Canada sat down, created a podcast, and now we have people all over the world listening to us. People all over the US and all over Australia, all over the Philippines, you know, Japan. We even have a few listeners in Russia. We have a listener in South Korea. And I know it's one listener because the amount of downloads equals the amount of episodes we put out. So it sounds like somebody in South Korea is hooked and has listened to every episode, which I love. And we would love to move forward and basically gain more listeners and get our message out there. And with the more resources we have, the more time we can dedicate to research, the more time we can make sure that all of our facts are golden and all of our statements are golden, and we can get better people on in order to have experts. Like this episode was fantastic because we had 2 medical experts on to make sure that we weren't talking bullshit. And we can get more experts and more knowledgeable people and more people of fantastic opinions to come out and help us. And I don't know, it's a project that I can really sink my teeth into. And it's all thanks to you guys. All thanks to all you little occultists out there that download and help us every week. And by the way, if you guys don't have money to contribute every month, we appreciate you listening anyway. You know, a download is a download, and the fact that you take a little time out of your week in order to listen to what we have to say is honestly humbling. And if you would like to help out in a totally free way, you can just simply, you know, share our social media pages. You know, point some people you think that would like us towards us. You know, go in a couple of those, you know, recommend a podcast group on Facebook or recommend a podcast group on Reddit or any social media page and give us a shout out. You know, this podcast is going to be the tortoise. You know, some podcasts gain popularity right away and become big. But with this one, we're gaining listeners and we're gaining followers and we're gaining fans and we're gaining occultists slowly and surely. And eventually, I think that together we're going to become a fantastic little community. We're going to become just a team of occultists that walk into the abyss together and explore things that need to be explored. And together, with me, Sage, Leon, our round table of rotating guests, and all our occultists out there, we're going to build something fantastic together. Anyways, that's enough bloviating from me. I think I've spoken long enough. Yeah, if you're wondering why some of these palate cleansers are longer than others, it's because I like the sound of my own voice. I'm one of those podcasters that actually likes his own voice, so sometimes I go on a little long, but enough arrogant talk from me. Thank you very much for tuning in this week. Thank you for taking a little time out of your day to let us invade your ear holes and tell you some creepy stuff about Nazi experiments. I will see you next week. I love you all. Don't touch snakes. Even if they're not poisonous, they bite.